It's my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Holbrook today, who's coming all the way from University of Edinburgh. So thank you to the audience for making this special time, and even more thank you to Dr. Holbrook for coming, because I know it's already late in their time zone. So Dr. Holbrook has a million accolades. I wrote some of them down, but I'm sure I'll miss some. So they were born in Honolulu, but then grew up in Southern California. They got their BS from Caltech. And then before going to graduate school, spent some time in the Peace Corps in Fiji, which sounds amazing. And then they did their MS at San Diego State University and got their PhD in astrophysics at UC Santa Cruz. They actually, in between there, even spent some time working at NASA at the Goddard Space Flight Center. They spent some time as a postdoc at UCLA and at the Max Planck Institute for the History of Science. They've been the president and vice president on many different societies, again, almost too many to name. And just last year was elected a Legacy Fellow for the AAS. So again, it's my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Holbrook. Thank you so much for coming to talk to us today.
Thank you for having me. So my story begins a little bit earlier than that. When I was in junior high in Los Angeles, they allowed junior high students to enroll as college students in the Cal State system. So while I was in junior high, I started taking science classes at Cal State LA. And so that's how I would spend my summers. And so through junior high and high school is where I took my first astronomy class, was at Cal State LA. And I just remember I lived near the La Brea tar pits, so I'd have to get on the bus and take the bus over to basically East LA. Close, now it's close East LA, when I was in junior high and high school during those summers. So I have a longer UC Cal State engagement. And I actually split my master's. I did 1 year of my master's, did the Peace Corps, and then came back into the second year of my master's. So if you ever think that my career is linear, you're wrong. Just, you have to give that one up. All right, so I'm here to talk about cultural astronomy, diverse astronomy. And yes, I am sitting in Scotland right now. Okay, so I wanted to start by saying that I've tried to make this presentation as visually accessible as possible. I use Tiresias Infofont, which is accessible. Who is Tiresias? It's the blind seer from Greek mythology. I see that we're going to have some problems with the slides because I converted them from Keynote to PowerPoint 5 minutes ago, so I'll try to manage. So I'll start by talking about my current project, which is called ASTROMOVES, and it's a qualitative study of the career decisions of astrophysicists, relocation, life-work balance, and reputations. It's funded by a Marie Curie Career Restart Fellowship, so it has to have a European component to it. So this is a nice, I'm so glad this animation is working. But you see astrophysicists, how they make their career moves. They start with their doctorate, and you're expected to do 1, 2, or 3 postdocs before you get a permanent, temporary, or tenure track position. Then on to a permanent, you get tenured, and then on to senior faculty. But those hash lines are some of those magic places where you can go straight to a temporary permanent position from a doctorate. Is very rare. Or after 1 postdoc, you can move it with tenure, or after the 3rd postdoc, you can move into with tenure. So there's a sort of this prescribed path, but there's shortcuts that can happen, and it depends on a lot of factors. Okay, so what are the concerns with astrophysicists today? There is a huge underrepresentation of women, with severe underrepresentation at the senior ranks, such as full professor. There's astronomy likes white people. Boom. They like white men best. Boom. So when you go to anything that has to do with astronomy, it's filled with white men. So they want to change that. They want ethnic and racial diversity. There's sexual harassment. We were national news in 2015 with all our sexual harassment issues coming up. And in Europe, the issue is the lack of representation from Eastern Europe, and like the former Russia and the former Yugoslavia. Mostly the astrophysics physicists are coming from Western Europe. Okay. So, data collection. My number one go-to way of collecting data is interviewing people. And I prefer to interview people face-to-face, but then COVID happened just as I was starting, and I waited and waited and waited. And finally, in August, I was like, I can't wait. I need to start collecting data. Otherwise, I'll have nothing. So I've been doing all the interviews online since August. And astrophysics, in case you didn't know, is kind of strange because there's a lot of openness. So they put their CVs online. I didn't know that this was rare until I started moving in other disciplines like anthropology and history of science, where they don't make their CV publicly available. There's the Astrophysics rumor mill on Astro Better, which talks about the career moves. As people get job offers, they post it on the Astrophysics rumor mill, so you can kind of see where you are. If you applied for certain positions, you see if they've already made a short list or not. And a lot of disciplines most disciplines don't have this, a public rumor mill. Then there's the astrophysics data system. Even though a lot of the astrophysics articles are behind paywalls, ADS often has them archived there for free. So we have this free official archive. And then there is the archive itself, arxiv.org, which is based out of Cornell, where you have an electronic preprint. It used to be that when you submitted articles, you'd make a preprint before it was accepted for publication, and then it gets accepted for publication, then it gets published. So these are all freely available, and you can trace the people and where they are by their authorship. They often have their affiliation attached to their names. So you can do, I don't want to say internet stalking, but call it what you want. When you're interviewing or picking people to interview, there's a lot of information online that can help you make your decision and follow their careers. So what are ASTROMOVES foci? First, I wanted gender diversity, and I wanted underrepresented astrophysicists on as many axes of underrepresentedness as possible and diversity as possible. So married, disabled, abled. It had to have, the people interviewed have to have some sort of a European connection, which means they need to be European or have spent time working significantly in Europe or collaborating with Europeans, therefore having a flow of information between themselves where they're located and bringing knowledge to Europe or helping European knowledge acquisition. They need to be at least 8 years post-PhD or at least 2 career moves post-PhD. And they don't necessarily have to relocate, but they need to have changed positions at least twice. Basically, I'm testing if the underrepresented move more and if families move less. What are the places that are career enhancers and what are places that are avoided and why? And finally, what support is needed to advance their careers and maintain their research careers? So included in my interview sample are people who've left astrophysics. So I get to ask them, well, what would it have taken for you to have remained in astrophysics? So here's a good example, person I will call Hawaii. Everybody who gets interviewed by me gets a Hawaiian name, since I'm born in Hawaii, and Hawaii is one of those contested sites of astrophysics. We need to be reminded how thankful we should be that the Hawaiian people have allowed us to build so many wonderful telescopes on their sacred mountain. So all astrophysicists get a Hawaiian name in my research. So this person I'll just call Hawaii. So here's like a map using a commercial map, Google Map, and it shows their movements. They made 4 relocations, 5 position changes, changed 2 countries, and the period of time of all this was 24 years. So Romeel was my first interview for ASTROMOVES. You guys can imagine why. He has his public CV and his affiliation on all the articles. And the rumor mill. The rumor mill is really important because most people forget like 3 job applications ago, which for Romeel would be, I don't know, 20 years ago or so. Where did you apply? Who made you offers? And what was your decision-making process? If they appear in the rumor mill, then every place that put them on the short list shows up. And so I know in advance what their options were. I still won't know how many they applied for and how many, they didn't even make the short list until I do the interview. So this rumor mill is really, really nice for me as a researcher. Okay, and so I think my mouse is working. Can you see my mouse? Somebody say yes.
Yes, we
Great.
can.
Okay, so here is an example of the rumor mill, what you see in the rumor mill. And this is where Romeel went from Arizona to University of Western Cape. And here is just one of his papers where you can see that he is listed where? Oh, here. And you can see his affiliation. And then I just have a screen splash of the job register, which actually doesn't have as many archived positions. So there was a possibility that I could have looked at the job ads and seen, how they presented things and who applied. But most of the job ads are not archived, so I couldn't do that. Okay. So the first set of interviews were seven individuals, and this paper titled ASTROMOVES, Astrophysics, Diversity, and Mobility has been accepted for publication for one of the IAU symposiums, but I put it on archive, I think last week or the week before, so it's publicly available. You can grab it off of archive. So that was seven people, 3 females, 4 males, great gender diversity, 3 cis, 2 bisexual, 1 homosexual, 1 asexual. And what I've learned, or how it changed my thinking, those 7, is that there's a huge issue with women and unemployment. Then there's the impact of COVID, and of course, and then there's financial factors. So if you look at studies of astrophysicists and their career decision-making, nobody talks about finances. So let's start with unemployment. Here we have a quote from Kamea. The end of my most recent research fellowship, then 3 months of unemployment, and it was pretty harrowing. I've never been unemployed before. So all 3 of the women interviewed, this is a somewhat random sample, have been unemployed at some point since PhD. That's 100% of the women. 2 as a result of COVID-19, but the other not. One thinks it was a gender issue, and the circumstances felt that if it had been a man, it wouldn't have happened. The implications of this are that women have more job insecurity in astrophysics and need more financial safety nets than the men do. However, this is the caveat, it's only 3 women that I have interviewed for that analysis. So let's see if it holds. Okay, next, the COVID-19 impact. Kamea still talking about what happened. She was up for an interview, and then they dropped her, and then a few months later, they started negotiations again. Maka'ala, who is in a permanent position, just was talking about, on the one hand, he had less distractions, so therefore got a lot of research done. But then when teaching was added to the load, then that started to get out of control. So he was not able to maintain a life-work balance as well when it was teaching and research. And this was COVID, everything online. Financial factors. Before obtaining a permanent position, most did not make decisions based on salary or cost of living. Okay. They did note when they had to have a drop of salary, like one postdoc pay to a lesser postdoc pay. But most of the time when I asked them about finances, they were like, it didn't matter until they got to their permanent position. So in that sample of 4 men, 3 men had purchased homes at some point, whereas the 3 women interviewed had never purchased homes. Now, so that was what was presented in that first paper. Now, today, the latest information updating the project, I'm aiming for 50 interviews, and at least 25 of those have to be white men, because that's what astrophysics looks like. I mean, I'm being generous by saying it's half white men. It's probably like 75% white men. So now I've completed 16 interviews, 8 women and 8 men, 2 asexual, 2 homosexual, 2 bisexual, and 10 cisgender, 3 married women, 4 married men, 1 with an invisible disability. 2 with invisible disabilities and 1 with a visible disability. So I'm getting there slowly. And now the statistics on unemployment is that 1 of those 8 women has not been unemployed. 1. Okay, and it goes without saying that the men have all not been unemployed unless it was intentional. And intentional meaning that they put their start date of their next position like a month later, so that they have holiday and movement. So it's not really unemployment. It's not like I'm hungry and I need to find money. It was basically a holiday. So what am I learning with these? Did I go backwards? Yes, I went backwards. Okay. So what am I learning with these new set of interviews? I'm learning about resentment and indignation. So resentment, handshakes with microaggressions, or death by 1,000 paper cuts, which is the life that women lead while in astrophysics. So the resentment begins with that negotiation of salary and resources in that permanent position. So most postdocs come with a fixed salary. It doesn't matter, who walks in, they all get the same amount of money. So this happens at every postdoc. No negotiation, just here's your money, here's your research stipend. But you have to negotiate when you get your job offer. And it's pretty well known that women under-negotiate. And all my interviews that I've done with astrophysicists, and you'll hear about them later, I've only heard of one case where the head of department went to the woman negotiating and said, you are not asking for enough. You need to ask for, and then provided a list for his future faculty member. Instead, I don't know what the head of departments are thinking. I think they think the women are a bargain, but this is the start of the resentment, that women negotiate for less, so they get less. Nobody tells them you're not asking for enough. Then they find out that the guy who was hired before them and the guy who was hired after them negotiated and got more, and they're the dip in the curve. So that's where the resentment starts. Like, okay, so you guys didn't want to say anything? Why did you not hire me at the same level as the guy before, or higher? There's cost of living. So that's the beginning of the resentment. And it could be considered, the beginning of microaggressions too, that already feeling like I am less valued in this department because they're not willing to pay me the same as they are the men. They're not willing to give me the resources I need at the same level as the man sitting next to me. So you have your resentment building your micro. Then there's indignation. So this has to do with tasks that they feel like they shouldn't have to do. And this is not necessarily limited to men or women. It's kind of across the board. And basically, when you're trained to be an astrophysicist, this is it. Research. This is number one thing. You should be doing your research. But in fact, as an adult astronomer or astrophysicist, you're doing many things. You're doing research and teaching and mentoring students, and you have some administration duties, and you have to sit on committees, etc. So, but the way that we're raised as astrophysicists, it's like we should only be doing research, and all those other things are taking us away from what we should be doing. And that's where the indignation comes in. Like, why should I have to spend so much time doing all these things that are not research? So, we get a bad attitude, right? So in another case that came up in these interviews, sorry, I have to stop a second and cough and have a drink. So okay, so in the ASTROMOVES interview, this came up in another instance where when you're in America, it's illegal in a job interview to ask questions about a spouse or children or family. And in the case of one of the people interviewed, they were asked, and that really brought up a lot of indignation in the person, and they actually just didn't want to do the rest of the interview. And not surprisingly, they didn't get the job, but they didn't really want the job where they had crossed the line by asking about a spouse or a family. Okay. Right, let's go to the next slide. So wrapping up, this is where I am with ASTROMOVES. Let's see if this works. So this is the data that's available. You have the CV bios, LinkedIn, ADS, you have the rumor mill. The new data that I'm creating is interviews and written notes and emails with the people that I'm interviewing. And then the things that I've already done is I've made maps, I've transcribed interviews. Luckily, when you do a Zoom recording, it auto-transcribes it. It's not the best, but I don't have to pay a transcriber, which is really good. I've already started writing articles, and the next big thing for the project is a documentary film, which hasn't started yet. I have the footage, but that's going to be, I think, after the project's finished. So now I want to move into descriptions of cultural astronomy. So this is a picture of me and Nick Campion in Slovenia back in 2012, or I must have been 2011 or 2012. And here is his definition of what cultural astronomy is. The study of the use of astronomical knowledge, beliefs, or theories to inspire, inform, or influence social forms and ideologies, or any aspect of human behavior. Cultural astronomy also includes the modern discipline of ethnoastronomy and archaeoastronomy. So, of course, what is archaeoastronomy? Basically, I divided into archaeoastronomy as studies of the dead and what they built, studies of the built environment, and it comes out of archaeology. And then ethnoastronomy is study of the living. It comes out of anthropology. Okay, so my part of cultural astronomy is I do a lot of indigenous astronomy, ethnoastronomy. I do interviews with living people, so I'm in that branch. I tend to not do very much with the dead. So cultural astronomy has two elements that have to be present. You have to be studying people and the sky. You can't have one or the other. Then it's not really a cultural astronomy study. So in cultural astronomy, place matters. So here is a map of Africa, and of course I'm always trying to be provocative, so it is what you would consider upside down, but south is at the top, and you have your three latitudes. You have your polar, you have tropics, and you have temperate. So Africa isn't in polar, but I'm just saying the division of the sky in general. Again, sorry. So it's the equivalent of what astronomers do, which is why do they travel all over the world in order to do observations of the night sky? And it's because different parts of the night sky are visible at different parts of the world. So it's the same with cultural astronomy, that when you're studying it, you have to have an understanding of what's actually up in the sky. And in the tropical region, it's different again. I'm going to take a sip. Hold on one second. because you have planets and the sun and the moon going directly overhead, which doesn't happen in the temperate and the polar zones. And so their relationship to those wanderers is different because they're somehow more immediate when they happen right over your head. So here is a short clip. Let's see if it plays. And it's probably not going to have sound. But let's see if I can get this to work. There we go. Okay. So that first panel was just showing Polaris, and Polaris is a really useful star for navigation because it marks the North Celestial Pole. One of my field sites was Fiji in the South Pacific. That's why this is all done from the perspective of Fiji. So the South Celestial Pole does not have a convenient star that's bright enough to be seen, but you see that they use some of the constellations that rotate around the pole, including the large and small Magellanic Cloud, to sort of triangulate as to where the South Celestial Pole is located. Okay, so how do people navigate using the stars and other celestial bodies? Okay, another one of my big studies. The data sources are from historical sources, ships, logs, letters, newspapers, pictures, publications by other researchers. And of course, I went out into the field and did anthropology research, ethnography research. I interviewed navigators in the 3 locations that I was studying. So the 3 locations were the Kirkina Islands in North Africa and Tunisia, Mode Island in Fiji in the South Pacific, and the navigators at the United States Naval Academy in Annapolis, Maryland. Okay, so what did I learn? So I love this picture because it reminds me of one of the most exciting and fulfilling parts of my life, which is time in Cape Town. So here is the profile of Table Mountain from Bloberg, and I use it as an example of the profile of islands. When people are navigating on the ocean, they use whatever is available in order to find their location. But these profiles of islands is one of the things that they use. They use wind, current, weather patterns. They use the flights of birds, the location of certain sea things. They use the different watercolor and different salinity. And these are all the things that they use in order to find location, other than using celestial bodies. When you get to celestial bodies in the tropics, they use star chain navigation, which, because all the sky rises and sets, right? Then they use chains of rising and chains of setting stars. They know the east-west path of planets, the sun and the moon, and they use those as part of their navigation. And they also know which star or asterisms or change pass over certain island groups. So they travel north and south and then turn right or left to get to the island group that they're aiming for. They also know, both northern hemisphere and southern hemisphere asterisms. In general, though, if you're in the northern hemisphere, almost everybody uses Polaris because it is so easy to use for navigation. So another question, what have people name things in the sky and why? So this involves a bunch of different types of studies. You could use sky lores, where you look at the myths and legends, and that comes out of the discipline of folklore. Using anthropology, again, interviewing people, watching what they do. Archaeology, learning it from the dead and their building alignments in order to find the directions and the celestial bodies that were important to them. They've basically put it in their building structure. Art history, to understand artistic works connected to the sky, and of course history analysis of written text. And astronomy, of course, because you got to have some understanding of what you're looking at. So these all come into play when you're trying to ask that question of what do they name, what's in the sky, why do they put it up there, and what are its names. But environment also matters because oftentimes things that are on the ground locally are reflected in the sky. So you have sky animals, and animal behaviors on the ground are also reflected in sky behaviors. My favorite example is Scorpion, and all these charts are generated in Stellarium, by the way. We love Stellarium, free and good. So here is the constellation, and here is the constellation with the lines so that you can see, and Antares is the heart of the Scorpion. Now, among the Navajo Dene in northern Arizona, it's not the Scorpion, which I think is fascinating because, of course, we have scorpions in Arizona, but it is the Big Man. So, and then in New Zealand, it is Timatau Maui, Maui's fish hook, which he used to pull up the North Island. So it doesn't make sense to have a scorpion in the sky in all context. Right, and so what are some of my cultural astronomy favorites? I like standing stones. I am living in the land of standing stones, which is very cool. But standing stones are, of course, a big problem because if you want to have alignment, if you want to know what's important to a people, having a circle is just not useful because, you know, you can do all kinds of things with a circle. So things like Stonehenge, they actually know what's important because the avenue, the entry into and out of the circle, points to the midwinter sunset sunrise, right? So we know that that's really important because they aligned that road in and out. But otherwise, unless there's a clear demarcation of where you were supposed to stand when you're looking at things in a circle, circles are just not very good for, you can make so many alignments using standing stones and circles. So you really need another point of reference. The other thing about standing stones is those stones are really nice, right? They're nice stones. They've been moved from somewhere else for you, and they're really nice. So if you've got to build a house or a wall, you know, they may borrow those stones. So you actually have to have the archaeological plan to see if all of the stones are there and what stones are missing. Okay. The next one, I'm going to have another. So because I was doing a lot of work in North Africa, I would pass through Paris to get there. So I spent a lot of time mapping the Louvre for their exhibits and their artifacts that had to do with the sky. So this is one of my favorites, with the Zodiac of Dendara. It's Egyptian. And what I like about this is that there's almost no constellation that's recognizable as being Greco-Roman. So it's like a whole different rendering of the night sky. Okay, hold on 1 second. Then astronomy, symbolism, and religion. So Mithraism. So Mithra, or the Mithric cult or mysteries, was a popular religion among the Roman soldiers. And here, I mean, you never think of the United Kingdom as being the place where there was a lot of Romans, but there's a lot of Romans. You know, even up here in Scotland, we have Antonine's Wall and Hadrian's Wall. And so in London, there's a temple, a Mithra temple that goes back to 240 Common Era. And here is the Tauroctony. So this is kind of the thing that you find in every Mithric temple, and that is this slaying of the bull. So you have Mithra slaying the bull, and you have dogs, and you have the scorpion, which is normally on the other side of the sky. And this one, I love it because it's, of course, recognizable as the zodiac going around the outside. So you have the connection between, you know, Roman cults and the night sky very, very clearly. And this is the part of the sky that we're talking about. My little pointer. here is Orion, which we think is Mithra. And then here is the bull, and here's the zodiac. It goes through this way. This Pisces, Aries, Taurus, Gemini, and Cancer. Okay, and you have your dog down here and there. So, so they think that the whole cult had something to do with the precession of the equinoxes, but that's just a theory. They don't know for sure. Another favorite of mine is astronomy and dance. I was a big dancer in the day, so there's the Shiwara which are part of the Bamana people's harvest dance, planting and harvest dance in Mali and West Africa. And there is 2 headdresses. I don't have my own pictures of the headdresses. I'll have to go to the museum. Like every museum that has African art has one of these headdresses, and there are 2 antelopes. One is a male with a head that looks like the sun, and then the other is a female with a little baby on the back. So the male is the sun and the female is the earth, and they do a little dance associated with the harvest, and that dance is to emulate how an antelope runs. You know, they go dee 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 dee, but also how the sun moves back and forth north to south over the course of the year. Right. So the zigzag is very important to the Bamana people. Then we have in Australia, I will kill this name, the Pitjantjatjara people, who have a dance associated with the 7 sisters, or the Pleiades, and of course Orion the hunter, chasing the 7 sisters. And there's each one of these dances have ritual, song, instruments that are played, costumes, and the dance themselves. Then there's sculptures of constellations, and this is from the work of Leslie Green and David Green in the Palicor region of South America. And this person is, whose name is there, whose last name is Ouet, is holding a 3-dimensional rendering of, I think, the Milky Way, part of the Milky Way. And I thought that's really cool. But going back to the Louvre, we have the artistic rendering of the planets. On the left, we have the very swift Mercury with his talons and his helmet with the little feathers. And then we have the beautiful Venus on the right. So that's sort of a quick tour of some of my favorite things in cultural astronomy. There are places where you can get a PhD in cultural astronomy. It's really not an undergraduate emphasis, it's a graduate emphasis. We have one in the Republic of Georgia, one in Thailand, one in the United Kingdom, and a new program is being formed, this last year at the University of Oklahoma. However, I do not recommend that you get a PhD in cultural astronomy because you will be unemployed. Instead, you should get a PhD in something and add cultural astronomy to it. So any kind of social studies of science, where you can get a job as a social studies of science person. So like I'm in science, technology, and innovation studies, that's STS, STIS. That can happen. Anthropology, linguistics, folklore, archaeology, any kind of combination. I've actually mentored PhDs in education where they had an astronomy component to it, and mentored PhDs in musicology and music where they had some sort of analysis of indigenous music that had to do with the sky. So that sort of combination of, in a discipline that's established, you have a career path where you will get paid, and then you add cultural astronomy to it. That's, I think, the ticket for success. But those other programs are fine if you don't mind having a designer PhD. You love the topic, it's something you want to do, but don't expect to get a job afterwards. So what am I working on? I'm mainly not doing any indigenous astronomy, which was probably fine because we're in lockdown all the time. But I'm mainly studying astrophysicists and astronomers. So let's see, I run 2 oral history projects, one for the American Astronomical Society in partnership with the AIP Niels Bohr's Library, where the interviews are archived. Then I run the South African project, which is funded by the National Research Foundation of South Africa, and those are going to be archived at the University of the Western Cape. Everyone who I interview, even for ASTROMOVES, is a volunteer. So we will interview anybody for these oral history projects. We've interviewed from undergraduates to emeritus. We've included Nobel Prize winners. I've included people who are support for training astrophysicists. When we were at San Diego, I reached out to a lot of people at UC San Diego, including the people who ran programs like CalBridge down in San Diego, and had them interview just to talk about the issues of getting students to go this path and keeping them inspired to do this fairly difficult subject. And what have I learned from those oral history interviews? Woo! We have a lot of imposter syndrome. And I don't care how accomplished people are. I'm like, that's why they call it a syndrome. It's like, how can you have all these prizes and everything and still have imposter syndrome? Well, they do. So it's pretty high in the astrophysics and astronomy community. In the AAS project, I heard some real talk from one of the senior women who got her PhD in like the 1970s, and she said, when we got our PhD, we thought we're just gonna like keep our head down and work hard, and after a while the guys will realize we're just as good as them, if not smarter, and then equity and equality would happen. And she's like, it didn't work. So if you want to have the number of women increase, you have to do something. You have to be proactive. You don't wait for it. The guys replicate themselves, and in some ways they replace themselves with someone who has even more skewed values than they do. So you have to be very proactive if you want to see cultural change in astronomy and astrophysics. Among the South Africans, I learned that the black and brown astrophysicists and other scientists often had to go abroad to get their PhD or a postdoc in order to be accepted as an equal back in South Africa. And of course, South African astronomy, you would think it's in South Africa, it's a black country, but no, it is as white as every other place in astrophysics, except for Asia, right? And I've already told you about the ASTROMOVES project. So moving right along, I'm a filmmaker. You guys may have seen some of my work. Whoa, that was not supposed to move. And finally, at the end of this month, I am going to do Africanizing NASA Moon to Mars on February 26th. This is my work with Native Skywatchers, this is an open, you can get on it. It's for K-12 mainly, but you might find it interesting. So with that, I will wrap it up. Thank you. So I will share.
Thank you so much, Dr. Holbrook. That was very interesting. So we already have a question in the Q&A. I don't know if you can see it or if you'd prefer me to.
Could you just read it for me?
Yeah. So Mara Dickinson says, in your ASTROMOVES study, are gender identities and sexual orientations collapsed together in your identity categories? For instance, you list homosexual, bisexual, and asexual right next to cisgender. So they're asking if you're separating sort of sexual from gender identities.
Right. So basically, I'm going to have three categories for gender: cis male, cis female, and other. Right. So my study is going to be the first one that's going to be other. Right. But you notice sometimes I'm presenting data as male and female. So it will not be collapsed. In some cases, I will be talking about gender, and then in other cases, I will be talking about male and female. I'm trying to get transgender into the data set, but we'll see. It's still early days. I hope that answered the question.
Yeah, I think so. So if anyone else has a question, you can raise your hand or you can just type it in the Q&A.
Hey, Mike Bolte. I see he wrote a comment.
Oh, is that in the chat?
Yeah, in the chat. Yeah.
So we have a new Q&A. So Michelle Espinoza asks, how do I break through the white male barrier as a female of color who got into the game late to become an astrophysicist?
Well, what do you mean? I could say, what do you mean break into the game? But really, astrophysics has turned me into an evil, mean human being and a bully. I'm a huge bully now, right? And I mean, Caltech taught me how to be obnoxious, so that's nothing new. But pretty much you just, it's not as if these were the guys who were the football players, these were not like the guys. These were like the nerdy guys. So they're pretty much just fronting. You guys, Mike and all you other guys on there, you can say that I'm wrong, but I'll get you later because I'm a bully, right? So they're pretty nerdy. They were the ones that were picked on, and with me. So if you push, they'll tend to give you what you want. And I think that, hi Raja as well. I think that as women, basically the biggest push you have to do is to go against your own gendered training, right? That need to be liked. I have already absolved you. You do not have to be liked. You need to be respected, okay? They may not like you, but they will respect you. So you have to do your work, do it well. You have to gather your resources. You have to fight the good fight. And they know they're wrong. I'm like, we know you love white men. That's why you keep hiring them, right? We know that. You're wrong, right? So I get to go around the world and bully people because they always want me to come into their department. Oh, Jarita, come and visit our department and tell us what you think about diversity. And I walk through and I'm like, a sea of white men. I'm like, you guys have failed again. And so the boots on the ground. It's not an A for effort. Oh, but we try. No, you don't get an A for effort. You get an A for boots on the ground. So when I see diversity, I'll stop being a bully, okay?
Great. So our next question comes from Raja, and it says, good to see you. And they're wondering if you would mind saying a few words about the projects that you're working on with them. So the Native Sky Watchers and the Two-Eyed Seeing Project.
Right. So Raja was on my dissertation committee. So he's a ringer, right? So he is going to be doing some observations, and I'm part of the Two-Eyed Seeing group, where it's one eye sees science as Western science or modern science, and the other sees it as indigenous science. And so what happens when you do a handshake? And so with this title that I had, as diverse science, cultural astronomy as diverse science, when you're looking at cultural astronomy, the diversity is usually built in. You can't talk about a culture and its relationship to the sky without talking about women and their relationship to the sky. When you're talking about cultures all over the world and their relationship to the sky. So it's kind of have this built-in diversity as opposed to this, something that's very distant, astrophysics, and they want to erase the relationship between who's actually doing the science and the science that gets done. Whereas, everyone, they want it to be true that it's universal, but it really takes clever people to pull together what programs should we be doing? What's the next step? And part of it is training, but part of it is you have to think differently, right? So when you have a bunch of people who think differently in a room, you get better science because they bring different ideas to the table, right? So Two-Eyed Seeing brings together NASA Moon to Mars mission and indigenous astronomy. So I'm going to be running this one called Africanizing NASA Moon to Mars, but I don't know if they'll let me call it that. That's what I call it in my head, because I want to rename some of the NASA things with African names. So that's what I'm going to be doing. But part of that is we're going to have like a little 5-minute short where we actually go to the telescope with Raja and learn more about the work that he's doing. But he's doing work on Mauna Kea, which is thank you to the Hawaiian people. So we'll get to thank the Hawaiian people and talk a little bit about Hawaiian astronomy, even though the topic is Africa, and Mount Hamilton, which I think is the Chumash Native Americans, but I can't remember if it's the Chumash people. So we still want to bring in the cultural component, even though we're looking at sort of high-tech astrophysics. So I think that's what he wanted me to talk about. Okay.
And it is 1:00 now, but we have maybe 2 more questions, if that's okay, that are already in the chat.
Mm-hmm.
So Diana Blanco asks, what are some of the examples of things that we can do at our own institutions to be proactive about addressing the issues of inequality and the lack of diversity?
What status do you have? Because unfortunately, these initiatives are always taken on by like the lowest ranked people with no power. So
Diana is a Calbridge scholar who's a grad student actually at Santa Cruz. In your department.
At my alma mater. Wow. So first of all, stop. Go to the head of the department. Who's head of department at Santa Cruz now?
I think it's actually Raja.
Raja! Ha!
Put
Raja on the spot. Yes, go and tell Raja he is not doing enough, right? And then tell him what he needs to do, because it's his job. You know, I actually, people say, grassroots. I'm like, I've done grassroots stuff. It doesn't go anywhere. You know, you can organize a protest, your protest is over, right? But you need really people who have power to do something, right? It's a priority. So, you know, and Raja, I hate to say it, Raja's just too damn nice. Raja, you need to get meaner. Who's your assistant director? You need someone mean to come down hard on people. Like, no, don't do that. And as a professor, you know, with me being a professor, I am like the bull in the china shop between me and between my department and my students. It's like, no, you can't say that to my student. You can't do that to my student. You know, I will like stop them cold. Like, what? What are you trying? What? No. And that's how people have to be. They have to be very firm. If they're going to bring in diverse students, they cannot let them hang out there by themselves. They need to be protected, because it's stressful enough just getting the dang PhD without having to do all this social stuff around it. Like, what? You've never sat next to a black person? Really? Really? You know, what? You've never studied physics with a black person? Really? You know, it's just like, we don't need that. We just need to get our job done. So you need to be the strong person who stands between the department and your students of color and protect them so that they can just get their work done.
Awesome.
Sorry, Raja, but you are too nice, Raja.
All right. And I think this will be our last question from Erin Michelle Thompson. She says, hello, Dr. Holbrook. Excuse me if I pronounce this incorrectly, Dr. Hakeem Oluseyi. Visited our class at UMD last February, and he mentioned you as the true expert in cultural astronomy. Just wanted to make sure you knew that we're singing your praises.
Okay, I'll take that from Hakeem. You know, Hakeem is the star of one of my films of Black Suns and Astrophysics Adventure. So he's like the star of that. But he also figured prominently in my other film, which is Hubble's Diverse Universe. And he appeared in the Washington, D.C. episode of The Science Tourist. So Hakeem is kind of this really great stage presence. So, but I have done much for like putting him in the public eye. So I'll take that from Hakeem.
All right. Well, I think we're just a little over. So thank you so much, Professor Holbrook. That was amazing. I learned so much. Thank you all for coming at this special time. 2 weeks from now, we'll have our next talk back at our regular time, 4 p.m. And we'll have someone from LinkedIn speaking to us. So that should be pretty interesting too. So thank you again, Dr. Holbrook.
Okay, I'm going to, don't close the meeting because I want to read the chats.
Great.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for coming. I'm going to go ahead and mute myself.